Today I want to tease apart the concept of anger. We've all felt it, we feel it physically, we feel it mentally, and sometimes we get lost in it. I found it's really useful to figure out what anger is and the utility of anger, because we often focus on all the negative parts of anger and how it can be destructive in relationships and all that sort of stuff, because truth be told, when someone is seen as an angry person, not many people want to get along with that person. In fact, if a child is not conditioned out of their aggressive behavior, now anger and aggression are a little bit different. Anger is a response, an instinctive response, whereas aggression is how you react in a particular situation. If children are not conditioned positively out of aggression, when they get older, they can have a lot more trouble later on in life. Especially, no one wants to keep in touch with a child or play with a child who gets hysterical when they don't get their way. So today I'm going to talk about two things when it comes to anger. First thing is a boundary violation, and the second thing is an element of injustice. How we come to understand them will determine how we react, at least from a head point of view. So let's deal with the first one, boundary violation. A person often gets angry when their boundary has been crossed. Let's think about it this way. If you've said no to somebody else and they keep pushing and pushing and pushing, that can travel over to anger on your part, and you may just react out that way. It's not about the reaction here, but it's about the boundary that you've established to begin with. So being able to identify a particular boundary is good to understand where that anger is coming from. Knowing what your boundaries are is the first step to making sure that people don't take advantage of you. It's as simple as that. If you're able to maintain and establish boundaries, you're working further and further into a sense of assertiveness. And this is where anger can kind of get misconstrued, because a person who's overconfident or a person who is narcissistic, they're a person who stands up for themselves and often sets up unrealistic expectations or certain boundaries. Or they may cross certain people's boundaries. So being able to stand up for yourself and knowing when a boundary has been crossed is actually a very useful skill to have, and it's a skill that we should all learn. I really believe this. So the first part of anger is knowing what boundary has been crossed for you and being able to identify with your own responses to that, as well as knowing who to keep around. If you're constantly being crossed by a person that says that they love you, you have to really tease apart the reasoning behind their boundary violations. Whether it's a partner, whether it's a spouse of some sort, or a child, or a parent, or even a friend. Knowing what your boundaries are and how a person's crossed them determines how much respect they have for you, but also determines on whether you should continue with that relationship or not. It's a hard one, because often people, when it comes to relationships, they offer some things and they take some things. And so knowing which people to keep in a relationship with and which are better on the wayside, it's such a personal decision that no one in a YouTube video can advise towards. But let me ask these questions. What boundary has been crossed? And how do I feel about that? The secondary element of anger is a justice element. Now, justice is something that happens in response to a boundary being crossed or something bad happening, so to speak. So to have justice, you need to know what has been crossed, and for that person to achieve that level of punishment for their crossing. When justice is not served, that initiates anger as well. One really important part is knowing, well, what has this person done and have they gotten away with it? That initiates anger. So there's a justice element to anger that is often people call it righteous anger or righteous judgment. That can often be like a theological or a spiritual or a biblical term, but if we put that to the side and bring it back to our own personal experiences, we can see that there are times where we have a set of values that have been crossed, and the person has broken those sets of values and they go unpunished with it, they get away with it. That can brew up a sense of anger in you. The important thing to consider is not turning anger into resentment. So being able to stare it in the face, being able to call it out, and being able to serve your own sense of justice. At least from either psychological point of view, you come to terms with what happened and making sure that something like that doesn't happen again. Not keeping people in your life who cross those types of boundaries and who constantly get away with them. You see that in narcissistic personalities all the time, or situations where there are controlling spouses, or even just really overburdening friends where they constantly cross another person and seemingly get away with it, or just do their own thing, satisfy their own emotional needs, while at the same time taking advantage of other people. Now the question is, how do you move past these? The first part is facing your demons, facing that sense of threat. And I keep going back to threat because that's what it is. Anger is an evolution of the fight response, where we tackle a particular threat that has come up. In this case, it could be a boundary crossing or a lack of justice that has been served in a particular situation. And so identifying that is a really important beginning step. And on top of that, being able to know, well, what do I do with a situation like this? Often we feel angry with the people that are closest to us. But from a larger point of view, we may feel angry at a particular system, a governmental system, or a system in particular power. And when we are able to break it down and say, well, this is what's causing me anger, then we can take steps to either distance ourselves from it, enact some sort of change, and stand more righteously, so to speak, in these particular situations.